It is marvelous, David. Thank you. When I was hearing this opening song, that idea of everybody knows your name kept coming up, and it sounds like a nice idea. Our spirits actually, as I typed in the chat, came up with those ingenious lyrics about so much of the life so many are leading now on this island, and Stuart came up with that adorable slide of Iris sitting at a bar stool, so you can have him to thank. I'm glad we are at that phase when a little joking is serving us well for some of us. But for some, it's a little bittersweet this week because I don't know if you know this, but the bar in Boston, modeled after the bar in Cheers, closed permanently last Sunday because of the pandemic. There was a replica of that Beacon Street bar, Bull and Finch, that inspired the TV series Cheers that used to be in Faneuil Hall, and that's what closed. Now, I'm afraid to look at the screen a little bit and see the number of young faces scrunching up, wondering what on earth Cheers is. And I know a few people under a certain age who watched a few episodes of Cheers and said, I don't get it. What's the big deal? So Cheers, friends, was a really popular situational comedy from the 80s and a little bit of the 90s about a neighborhood bar and all those who worked and frequented the bar. The characters were lovable. The show launched a lot of careers for a lot of actors, not the least of which was the notable spin-off Frasier, which is one of the most successful television comedies of all time. And it was one of the only two shows that my parents did not let me watch. And I support this. Cheers glamorized a lot of habitual drinking and likely had a message that a bar is a fitting place to be known, welcomed, and to spend a lot of time. Also, it seems no matter how much they drank, none of them ever got drunk. So if that's a person's choice someday, great. But I totally understand a parent not wanting a child thinking it's something to aspire to. Also, watching it now, there were a lot of sex jokes in it too that I didn't really get when I was younger. In case you're wondering, the other show that I was forbidden from watching growing up was Three's Company, which, watching it now, I know had a lot of themes about sex, including polyamory, homosexuality, and general romping around an apartment complex, not wearing a whole lot. Now, if I'm being honest, both of these shows and all I was to be sheltered from by not watching them as a child paled in comparison to my early 20s. But that's probably a sermon I can never really preach in polite company. So, just so you know, I did drink at that bar, at that Cheers bar, once upon a time. I was in Boston because a friend of mine from high school was running the Boston Marathon. He was running it to raise money for research into curing multiple sclerosis. He was running that race because my best childhood friend, the runner's high school soccer teammate, was diagnosed with MS in college. So a lot of us from high school gathered in Boston for the marathon to watch my friend run it and to support him and the cause. My hotel, the hotel I shared with my friend with MS, was actually about right on mile 17 of the race. And I remember it was a part of the race where the hill just started to go back up after a long downhill. So lots of people's blood pressure went back up and they would just fall over. It was a rough race. And I remember seeing my friend at mile 17 who was running it really hurting about then. Later in the race, he actually had to finish in a bit of a walk, and my friend, the one with MS, actually ran some of the last stretch with him to the finish line, even though that was against the rules. Our buddy was so cramped and in such pain that he had to lay down and have someone work on his legs so he could eventually walk himself out of the reception for the runners who were raising money for his charity. And one of the places we all went afterwards was the Cheers bar. I remember going down those steps, and I actually remember getting a table where we had some food and some beer. I wasn't a vegan who doesn't drink then, so I was a lot more fun. It was a lot easier to share a meal with me. It didn't take as much work to get through a menu. I just sat there next to my friend's father, who was my second dad, and we enjoyed our meal and our beers a lot. At that place where everybody knows your name. And naming things, my friends, is important. Naming things helps us understand them better. In some beliefs, naming things actually gives you power over them. And in our reading today, Dr. King addressed the Memphis sanitation workers who were striking for fair wages and safe working conditions in that city. And he named the ways that the unfair treatment of workers is robbing them of their dignity. He makes it so clear that there is dignity in all labor, that the indignity comes from the disparate treatment of persons doing the labor, of paying wages so low that full-time work only pays a half-time wage. And this is at the heart of the promise of a job, the promise of a career, the promise of work well done that is broken, that is breaking so much, so often now for so many of us. Our spiritual theme, as Carol let us know, for September is promises. So it's fitting that on this island and on this weekend, we take a look at what hard work promises and what it fails to deliver at times. And the impact of COVID on jobs isn't just for those who lost their jobs and can't find work. The expectations for people with jobs who are doing good work have become such that they are now really doing sometimes 3 jobs. Like lots of teachers, for instance. Their jobs have become hard and joyless. They've learned new technologies. They have multiple screens set up where they used to have a classroom. The work, the hard work that used to be rewarding for so many jobs is slipping away, even from the people who have jobs they like. Just imagine what the postal workers are feeling right now, whose livelihoods are becoming political pawns and punching bags as we feel the slowdown ahead of the showdown that we all know is coming. The thuggish treatment of this venerable and entirely nonpartisan institution is a mockery of the best values of humanity that Dr. King spoke of. Dr. King's bold statement that all labor has dignity is not only a socio-political statement, this is church, it's a theological statement. The texts from which he drew inspiration, the Hebrew and the Christian scriptures, are filled with the messages that the laborer is worthy of the hire, that a laborer is to be paid in accordance with their work. Even the Roman Catholic Church issued an entire papal encyclical on labor itself. That was the 60s. They were pretty hippie back then. But even in Buddhist living communities, there were ritualized periods of working, or there are ritualized periods of working on one's own home, then helping to work on others' homes in a proportion that keeps all the practitioners of that belief focused on the wider community more than on their own individual residences. The Hawaiian religion recognizes the sacred season that will arrive in the coming months of the Makahiki, when work and labor ceases for a time to enjoy the bounty that came from the labor of so many hands, of so many wants. Work and labor coexist, co-mingle, and cooperate with lives of faith in ways that are deep, are powerful, and are very, very old. And I know you know that's true, friends, because it's Jubilee weekend. And what did Jubilee mean in the Old Testament but a release from bondage of slavery that would happen in some ways every 7 years, in other interpretations every 50 years, but Jubilee means release from servitude. And you can feel it, right? You know the work is happening that we are doing, right? I don't know, maybe some of you don't feel like that. But don't worry, I'm not setting you up for a punchline from an 80s sitcom here. One of the things we hear over and over in Jubilee and in other areas of learning new ways of being and doing anti-racist work and doing all kinds of social justice work is the phrase, you've got to do the work. You've got to be doing the work. And so one of the most important questions we will ever ask is, what is the work? My, oh my. That is hard to answer. What is the work. For one of the best descriptions, I think we need to go way, way back, like 30 minutes ago, to the chalice lighting. Listen to the words of one of the great minds of the century, W.E.B. Du Bois. It is today that we fit ourselves for the greater usefulness of tomorrow. Today is the seed time. Now are the hours of work. And tomorrow comes the harvest and the playtime. Sounds a lot like the Makahiki to me. Now are the hours of work. Let me tell you something about the work, friends. On Wednesday, I rehung our church's Black Lives Matter banner. You might remember, the first one went up fast in response to the murder of George Floyd and many uprisings and upswells we participated in on this island, and then someone cut it down. And it took a few weeks to get it back up again. It took more talking than the first time, more planning, more discussion than the first time, but it got back up. And now we don't know what will come with that sign in the future. We don't know what results might occur, what kind of ways it might impact our church. And some of us are wondering what other messages we should be presenting to the public, what other ways we should be including voices and people on this island whose lives are being impacted by disparate policing, disparate adjudication, and disparate treatment. That is part of the work too, friends. Trying something new, feeling the fear when something happens, then having the hard conversations about what worked and what didn't, then taking action again. Maybe actions that felt like they didn't even work the first time. That is part of the work. Those are some of Du Bois's seeds. In his words, and tomorrow comes the harvest and the playtime. Now I know that does not feel satisfying right now, because that is not all the work, friends. The work shows up when you're not expecting it sometimes, when you're not proclaiming that you are doing the work. As an example, I was telling a friend Wednesday that I just finished rehanging our sign. This friend lives in upstate New York. He has no particular involvement with the church. He just asked what I'd done that day, and I was just kind of going through the day. I said, I had a meeting, I hung a sign, I got in a run, blah, blah, blah. And he stopped me on the sign. And I explained some more, and I explained that someone had cut down our Black Lives Matter sign, and I had just put it back up, and I began to explain some of the situation. And then he stopped me from talking, and he interrupted me. Now, I'm kind of used to that, because sometimes I think my friends just hear when I talk, just vegan, justice, Star Trek, vegan, justice, white supremacy, baseball, Bonnie Raitt, vegan, Birkenstocks, just kind of coming out of my mouth. But my friend put all that aside and said, wait, are you telling me that someone was paying attention to something a church was actually doing? They were paying enough attention to a church to risk trespassing on their land? And he continued, he said, sorry, but as a country, we just don't see a lot of people paying that much attention to churches anymore. I hadn't even thought of that. It hit me, though. And that's when I realized that I am only staring at the hammer and the stakes in my hand, at the ground we need to plant those stakes to hold the sign, at the cords and the ties we need to bind that sign to the one that stood there first. I can't see the expression of that work yet, but maybe others can. We know at least one person did, so we know others can. Maybe they can see things now that were only seeds for us before. Now, I don't remember a lot from my time at Cheers, if I'm being honest. Now, I promise it wasn't because I was drinking too much either, at least I don't think so. Mostly, I remember sitting there with my best friend's dad, my second dad, Chris. Chris had a way of kind of just holding his beer with two hands and kind of looking up at you like a kid, just about to tell you the first dirty joke he ever heard. And I'm about to sound like I grew up in a really tiny little town, but Chris, my best friend's dad, was also my postal carrier. Chris delivered my mail to my home for the entire time my family and I lived there outside of Rochester, New York. He knew when I got college acceptances or denials, things like that. And then 2 years ago, after a sudden bout of stomach cancer, he died. This man of dignity and of love, who raised the man who has meant as much to me as any other person in my life, who cared for my best friend when MS was threatening to upend his entire life. My second dad died. But the work he did in his life, his job, but also the work he did in loving his son and me, son number 2, which is what my friend's mom calls me, is one of the greatest sources of caring and love I have ever known. So when we ask, what is the work, friends? Loving people with all your might, with all your strength, with all the power that God or biology or the earth or the stars above might grant you until you can't anymore. However you slice it, however you want to look at it, however deep you want to get, that at its heart is the work. Friends, we all know work just ain't what it used to be. Not for anyone. Work is changing, transforming, transmutating before our very eyes, in our very hands. And if you don't think it's going to get worse before it gets better, if you don't think it's going to get harder before it gets easier, if you don't think there is a whole lot of planting to do before you get any growing, you better order another round and keep drinking. You better get ready, because this is a marathon, friends. It is not a sprint. It's going to take work. Then it's going to take more work. And then it's going to take a little more work, because that is how we see the blossoms come from the soil we till. So when we ask, what is the work? We ask ourselves if we are loving the person next to us as much as we can. When we ask, what is the work? We ask ourselves if a friend is running a marathon ahead of us, and whether we should maybe join the heck in. When we ask, what is the work? We ask ourselves, did we not make our way in the world today with everything we've got? If so, then it is with hope that we feel in the soil of this community that we are building a new way to real compassion one day. It is with the grit we show when we till the soil of this community that we are building a new way to real justice one day. It is with the determination of every hour of every day of every year we have left to love others on this earth that we are building a new way to real joy at last one day, right here in this very world. We must do the work in the world. For all of the other workers in the world, on their behalfs and on our own, until that day when at long last the dawning of the beloved community comes to be upon this earth in a new day, and together we will build a new way where the workers of this world truly can unite. May it ever be so. Blessed be, and amen.